Hello and welcome to the Services School Stories podcast. You'll hear from veterans and partners who'll share their stories and insights about how you can use higher education to transition from the military and achieve your goals. Now let's get going.
Welcome back to Services School Stories, the podcast where we help service members and veterans navigate their path into higher education through honest, real conversations. I'm your host, Whitney Cason. Today, we are joined by two incredible guests. We have Nate Tiegs, U.S. Army veteran and current Amherst College student whose journey includes poverty, chronic illness, and a difficult transition out of the military. His Amherst essays, which he shared with us, tell stories of a remarkable journey toward discipline, mindfulness, and self-understanding. We're also joined by Nick Fritz, Amherst Senior Assistant Director of Admissions for transferred military applicants. Nick reads hundreds of essays from veterans each year and brings deep expertise on how to talk about hard experiences in a compelling and appropriate way. Today's episode is really going to center around one very big question. How can veterans discuss difficult experiences in their admissions essays in a way that's reflective, empowering, and effective? So Nate and Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Nate, we're going to start with you before we get into kind of writing and essays. I want to start with your transition out of the Army. That period can be challenging for many veterans in ways that aren't always dramatic or traumatic, but are still very real. What was that transition like for you?
To put it simply, it was involuntary. I had been administratively separated, for lack of a better term, a lot of disciplinary issues on my end, culminating to the end point of getting a DUI and the leadership having to make a tough decision in seeing that I was not on a good trajectory and that I needed to find a better place in order to be able to rediscover my growth pattern or my need to be able to return to who I was.
All right. So you described in your essays that losing certain anchors after leaving the military, your routine, your sense of identity, and that stability you once relied on, how did those feelings kind of shape your next steps?
I feel like it was both in a way like liberating, but also challenging. The sense of having to like almost give up everything that I had known and understood, but then also being able to like take on a lot of the unknown and be able to approach it without feeling like I needed to like hold on to things that I believed were necessary for my progression. So I was able to like really take on the full experience of returning to college and returning to the civilian life with the hope of being able to like become a new person, a better person.
What point during all of this transition, and I know that for you it was pretty quick. At what point during this transition did you start to begin thinking about your education, and then what was next after transition?
It was a lot of job seeking. The process for me trying to find work after the military was very difficult. The job market right now is extremely tumultuous, even for new graduate students. And not having a bachelor's degree and trying to get into work with experience from the military, which typically would be seen in more of a managerial sense or more of a senior role without prior education, is very difficult for a lot of jobs to feel confident in an applicant's ability and capability. So with wanting to get back into the job market, I saw that I needed to really return back to school and be able to both receive an education and show that I'm capable of getting a bachelor's degree, but then also being able to expand my learning and expand my own understanding of the world, being even part of a larger group similar to the military with education, being around a lot of diverse thoughts and opinions.
Right. So let's kind of talk about that academic preparation, because many veterans worry that they've been away from the classroom for too long or they're just not college ready. What did your academic path look like before Amherst?
I had done probably about 3 to 4 years of prior experience. I got an associate's degree in the music industry before joining the military. And while I was in the service, I was also trying to pursue a bachelor's degree online. And I was already taking some classes, not a whole lot to feel like I was at all a student or academically prepared, but at least something to try to like help me feel like I could like reapproach the education system when I was like preparing to actually join back into the civilian world, a lot of programs like Service to School, like Warrior Scholar Project, like Task Force Dagger, and a lot of other veteran groups to help support people both in transition and afterwards really helped me feel like I was able to step into things without feeling completely alone.
So you mentioned Service to School. What point in the process did you reach out to us, and how did we assist you?
I guess I reached out while I was going through the transitionary process in the Army, at least. I'm not sure what the other branches, but in the Army, there's a multitude of paperwork that needs to go through. It takes a couple of months if it's like really thoroughly done, but its processing time, at least now, should take about a year of just constant appointments and meetings and paperwork and a lot of conversations about what's the next step, where are we going from here. So a lot of it was just looking online at like what should I be looking at, what should be my next step, what options are available for me. And Service to School, along with Warrior Scholar Project, popped up on Google to at least be able to like find what could help me find that next step. But getting in touch with Service to School was super approachable, super easy. I was really thankful to at least be able to like talk to someone really immediately, be able to feel like they had my back and be able to get me in touch with someone who was understanding of my circumstances and then be able to help me get ready for that next step.
I'm so glad that you were able to find us and we were able to get you an ambassador that was able to help you through this entire process. In your essay, you mentioned wanting connection and progression and a community that demands greatness from itself. Was that what drew you specifically to liberal arts colleges and to Amherst in particular?
Not really, actually. I didn't know a lot about schools outside of my own state back in Minnesota. So, like, almost every single school, including Ivy Leagues, I didn't even know the name or recognize their position. It was really just the people that I got to meet through the VetLink program, through a lot of Q&A sessions from Service to School, being able to like listen to someone of the admission staff, be able to talk about what they offer, what school means for them, and they are trying to embody with their students. So it was really just the admissions officers were the ones who I really drew a connection with, not necessarily the school.
Hey, that's a unique take on what pulls you to a school. But I also think that it's really important to feel kind of wanted and to feel like you're going to belong. Nate, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about something that will be incredibly relatable for many of our veterans, your transcripts. Your first school closed and AMU didn't quite meet the threshold, right, for transfer. But you submitted a transfer application and then suddenly you were stuck in a bureaucratic kind of no man's land. Can you talk us through what that moment was like? How
I felt like after getting as many transcripts as I could get done, already being on a deadline with leaving the service, I was really struggling to just kind of meet every single challenge as it was. And I really just had to leave it up to like whatever was available. I sent a couple of emails over to admissions officers, just letting them know of my circumstances and to just at least hope that they would apply that into the process. Most of the time, I imagine they couldn't. They have so many emails that it's just one more thing that they'll probably miss. So I really left it up to chance while I was also working on trying to find housing after leaving the service.
so you actually were in a you were in a difficult situation. So not only were you trying to navigate admissions and everything else, but you also found yourself to be homeless, correct?
Yeah.
What were you doing? How were you navigating going through the applications and also trying to just secure a place to stay?
It was a lot of compassion from others who still saw the chance that I could offer for improvement and still being a good person that reached out and offered me some grace to be able to like get past that moment in my life, to be able to move on in things. And a lot of that I'm extremely appreciative of. It was just it was a lot of just being open and just being able to accept others' support.
Incredibly difficult and humbling to be able to do that. Most applicants would think that that's kind of the end of the road, that without those documents, a school like Amherst would just kind of close the file. But in your case, Amherst actually reached back out to you, right? What'd they say? And kind of how did that interaction go?
Lexi reached out to me and offered an opportunity, at least as I read it, since other schools at the time had already like gotten back to me and sent rejection emails, which I'd figured was like because of an administrative, either was because I was not the fit they were looking for, or because I didn't meet the criteria for a transfer student, that it was seemingly pretty obvious that I might have to like reapply. But when Lexi reached out for Amherst College, she said that there was a way for them to just reorganize or reconfigure the packet as from a transfer student to a first year student. And all that they needed was just my acknowledgement that that would actually happen. So it really showed just the humanity behind the process and being able to see that it's not just all a bunch of paperwork and procedures, just like many people recognize in the military. There's still a person behind everything. And there's still someone who is willing to reach out to make things work.
Right, Nick, this is actually the perfect moment to bring you in. A lot of people hear this part of Nate's story and kind of wonder, how was Amherst able to evaluate an applicant with those missing transcripts? Can you explain kind of the Amherst process, the holistic admissions process, and how that approach allowed you to consider the whole person?
Sure. So I think starting specifically with Nate's circumstance, I think it's really important to note that the experience at like a small liberal arts college gives you the opportunity to have more of an intentional and kind of one-to-one relationship with the applicant, right? Yes, to the point you made earlier, Whitney, we do get tons of applications, right? There's a lot of things happening at various points throughout the year for sure. But when we're looking at our veterans and when we're looking at transfer students, we're looking at populations that we understand have a very atypical or non-traditional pathway through the admission process. They're already kind of dealing with barriers and obstacles in an application that maybe feels like it wasn't designed for them, right? So when you're already going through kind of those kinds of hoops and you're already like, I don't even think I have the GPA or the ability to be admissible at a place like this, why bother? If we have the opportunity to say, let's have a conversation, let's think about how we can make this work, maybe not the way that you're thinking, but if you have some flexibility, if we can pivot, there is the ability to do that. I will say that doesn't happen always, right? Nate is kind of a little bit of a one-off here with us saying, we think that there is the potential for a conversation. We think this could be a really good fit for you and for us. Are you open to that, right? A lot of times there's a timeline saying, I have 2 years, I have to do this as a transfer, and that's the end of that conversation. With Nate having the flexibility to say, I can do this as a first year, I have that ability, we're happy to go through that process. Because the transcripts, to your point, and scaling out a little bit, looking at the holistic process, is only one piece of it, right? We don't want students thinking, specifically military service members, veterans, to think that transcripts or GPAs or test scores are the be all end all of this process, right? There is so much that goes into an application that is going to make you really kind of stand out and give complexity and nuance and layers to that, right? So yes, we do care about transcripts. We do need to see a little bit of a runway to say, here's a student that is going to be successful in our classrooms. Yes. But we're also looking to see, what else are you bringing to our communities? What kind of extracurriculars do you bring? And that doesn't just mean clubs or things like, after school in a high school world, right? But military experience, work experience, family responsibilities, all of those things really do kind of add to the nuance of each individual applicant. And your essays, which is kind of the focus of today, is really the point to shine through all of that, right? How can you use your voice, your lived experience to say, this is something unique. This is something that I bring to your campus that nobody else in your applicant pool is going to do. And I really think that's where Nate shined as an applicant. Each one of his essays, whether it was the essays through the first year app or the transfer apps that he was writing essays for, through the event like addendum, which is incredible context and giving, both civilian and military experience, to the short answers, the way that he talked about his experiences, his reflection on his past, all of those things gave us confidence and reassurance that this was a student who we can find ways to make the transcripts work. We see evidence of someone who fits a lot of the mission and the value of what Amherst is.
Right. So, Nate, in your application, you chose to write openly about experiences like homelessness, chronic illness, and instability, not for shock value, but to demonstrate resilience and self-awareness. How did you decide what to share and what to keep private?
A lot of it I felt was trying to embody the idea of the growth mentality and really just be very transparent with what I was experiencing and dealing with. The idea that, like, if I were to be accepted there, it would be obvious that I was dealing with these things. I wouldn't want them to be a shock or a surprise to anybody. I would want them to understand that I was dealing with it, but then also be able to support me through that, as it was something that was very difficult for me to deal with. And I really was wanting to at least keep in mind that while it was new and it was shocking for me, and that I was really struggling to grapple with the scale of such a concept to me, that others might have a better understanding of it. They might have other family members or friends who have gone through it, and they're able to help remediate it, to bring that sheer size of something that's so shocking to me down to a more reasonable scale that I can feel like I can manage with it better.
You described losing your loved ones, how you or who you believed you were, and the security in your work during a difficult period of your life, and that those losses pushed you toward mindfulness and introspection, and ultimately taking responsibility for your actions. How did writing about those experiences shape your understanding of them?
I feel like part of what I was really wanting to write about in my essays was trying to take more responsibility for my actions and be more accountable. A large issue that I was struggling with when I was transitioning or when I was battling for trying to stay in the military was this sense of blame. And a lot of it was really trying to, like, let go of trying to find the bad person or trying to find the problem, and just be able to accept things as I'd created them and be able to take that responsibility. I'm not sure if that really does answer it. Sorry.
It does. It very much does. You're owning up to your actions, and you're really taking and allowing them to you're be able to show and highlight them in your essays to show the potential, the person that you're becoming. Nick, when you read an essay like Nate's, one that deals with serious life challenges, what are the markers that tell you that this is a strong essay rather than the one that leans too heavily on the trauma?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because it's something that I think a lot of applicants are really kind of trying to piece together for themselves. I think there is this kind of not stereotype, but I think there's this kind of idea that you need to talk about the worst thing that has ever happened to you to get someone's attention, or to create this kind of pathos appeal of saying, look what I've gone through, right? And I think that if that's a route you want to explore in an essay, I think it's certainly a viable pathway. However, the one piece I like to highlight with these types of essays is make sure that you circle back to what you have learned from that, what you have taken away, how you have grown from that. And I think one thing that makes Nate's essay so compelling and successful is from the beginning of that essay, he acknowledges that he's going to talk about something that is difficult, something that he's struggled with, and he immediately in that opening paragraph alleviates the concern that this is going to be something that is going to debilitate him while he's a student. He addresses it, he's taken ownership of it through the essay, and then he's navigated through that process to say, here's how I'm thinking about this experience. Here's how I'm going to use this to move forward. And then when you get to the end of that essay, he circles back to it saying, here is the struggle. Here is something that I've learned. Here is something that I'm going to take with me on this next step. So I don't get to the end of an essay being like, wow, this was a terrible thing that happened to this person. Instead, I'm thinking about this saying, here's someone who demonstrates resilience. Here's someone who has taken a challenge and has not let that define them, but they are redefining that, right? And I think that's what makes a lot of students who are worried, just to segue back to something earlier too, right? If you're worried about test scores and grades and things like that, you can say, look at all these other these experiences I have that demonstrate ability. There's evidence in your life to say, I'm ready to be a successful candidate at a place like Amherst or similar institutions.
You are absolutely correct. Nate's essays were spot on, exactly what they needed to be, and were absolutely beautiful. I wish everybody could read them, but sadly you cannot. What are some common mistakes that you see applicants make when they try to talk about a difficult experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think kind of jumping back to that first point is if you don't give it that resolution, right? I think if folks who are reading your essays are getting to the end saying, I wonder if this student is ready to deal with this, or have they thought about what they might need if they leave their current place, right? If you travel to Northeast America, right, and you're like alone for the first time away from family or other resources, are you able to be a student and deal with that? Yes, we have great resources on our campus. Yes, we can make sure that you have supports and things like that, but we also want to make sure that you are physically, mentally, emotionally ready to be in the space to be a student as well. So not tying up those loose ends, I think, is a big piece of what makes maybe a mistake that could be a quick fix.
Absolutely. For many veterans specifically, they feel the pressure to talk about their military service in detail, even when the difficult experiences they want to write about aren't combat related. Do you kind of give them permission to write about something else? Do you want to see all things military, or kind of do you have some pointers for service members in their essays?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really your choice. And I have tons of conversations with veterans or service members who are kind of like navigating this of what's the best approach. And I think it really does come down to what works best for you. What are you trying to highlight in your application? In some cases, I think using your essays to talk about your service is great. I think there are some veterans I talk to who are like, I really do want to use this as turning the page and I want to talk about me as the civilian. And I think that's a viable and perfectly good pathway too. I also think in terms of tools, the vet link addendum is a great resource for that, right? If you want to do a little bit of both, absolutely, you can touch on it in your essays. But if you use the vet link addendum to really highlight your military experience, that gives you 2 essays to really dedicate to other things as well. Or maybe if you're kind of a little bit savvy, and Nate, I think you do this quite well too, you can subtly mention your military experience through your main essays, but really lean into the addendum to highlight that through a specific lens. Do a little bit of best of both worlds with that.
Absolutely. Nate's essays were not overtly military. It was not all military in any way, shape, or form, actually. It was actually a beautiful blend of being able to touch on both his previous experiences growing up to, his current experiences, and then, of course, what he was looking forward to in the future. They're actually a beautiful example of what you should do in your essays. So, Nate, let's shift back a little bit to the academics for a moment. Amherst is known for being rigorous. What were you most nervous about academically before arriving on campus?
That's kind of a funny question, at least for me, since I didn't really know anything about Amherst College or any of the schools really in the Northeast. Since I grew up in the Midwest for so long, I was more familiar with Iowa State or Minnesota State University or Duluth than any school around Boston or even in Western Mass. So the challenge of the rigorousness of the school here surprised me in the classroom, not in the admission process. So maybe it was like kind of removing that fear of rejection because of the rigorousness that kind of helped me to be able to gain a little bit of like ignorant confidence to be able to put my foot through the door. It was also to really highlight the idea of the one-off that Nick brought up. I also was putting my transcripts through or applying for colleges when SATs and ACT scores were still in their pilot phase of not being necessary for a lot of schools. So I didn't need to really also go through and redo an SAT or an ACT score and have that also feel like it was burdening me as well.
Very important. And just to touch on that really quick, Nick, what is the current stance on academic tests for Amherst?
Yeah, sure. So Amherst remains test optional. We have no plans to change that. In terms of first year students that apply, around half of our students apply with. For transfer and military, I think largely students choose not to. Whatever feels right for you works for us.
All right. And then back to Nate. Once you got to Amherst, what did that academic transition kind of feel like? Was there a moment where you thought, all right, I can do this?
I feel like it was in looking at how Amherst approached the first year student process by giving students a first year seminar, by having the open curriculum even accessible at the very first semester, by only having like 4 classes as their maximum or their expectation for the semesters, being able to like look at it on a timeline and look at how much of the expectation there was really made me feel like, okay, this is very much approachable. It's not a lot to really expect. There's only really 3 things I need to do throughout a week. And then if I can manage it well enough and I can keep up with things in the reasonable expectation, if I can use the resources that are available on campus, like the Writing Center, like the Strategic Learning Center for time management, like the peer tutors, like a lot of the advisors and the additional instructors here who are all PhD or master holders to be able to get extra assistance with assignments or understanding a topic or understanding a process in something like physics or mathematics. It really just made it feel like I was given a lot of tools and resources to be able to keep up with the day to day.
I'm so glad you touched on utilizing your resources. It's an undervalued aspect of colleges that should absolutely be in consideration whenever you are looking at institutions. And Amherst is absolutely amazing in what they have to offer. You wrote about your desire to ignite improvement in others and surround yourself with peers who push themselves. How's that shown up for you at Amherst?
I'm not entirely certain. Most of the time, I've actually seen that happen when others have told me that they've been inspired by me. And right now, at least, I've really been kind of huddled away, focused on my studies, trying to keep up with things, that I really haven't created a lot of opportunity to embark on that for others. And that's something that I'm hoping to be able to really build on and offer in the next coming semesters.
Being to that growth mindset, you're always looking for ways that you can improve yourself. Nate, your essays highlight an evolution from hardship to mindfulness and a shift in how you engage with yourself in the world. Can you talk about how that personal growth shows up, again, as we were talking, in your academic life and, of course, in your relationships that you're building on campus?
I think it's a constant and never stagnant situation where for me at least, there can't really be a sense of complacency for something being stable. Um, the the idea that there's always a resource or there's always someone who's there.
When you see an applicant demonstrate not just experiences, but maturity, self-awareness, and reflection, how important is that in the decision-making process?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it because, I mean, obviously we're looking at transcripts because we want students to be successful in the classroom, right? We're looking for students that have robust extracurriculars and strong writing because we want to see what they're bringing to our community. But I think there's a whole character side of that comes with it to make sure that it's going to be a student that is going to be, really immersing themselves not only in the academic side, but also kind of taking advantage of all of the resources that Nate was so nicely kind of highlighting, right? Whether it's going to all of these different resource centers, whether it's looking for research and opportunities in internships and things like that, having the maturity to seek out these resources, having the want and the drive to say, not only am I looking to get a great degree from a place like Amherst, but I'm really looking for an education. There's a lot more than just showing up to class, right? So using to kind of circle back to the big topic of the day, right? Like using your essays to highlight all of that, to say, here's who I am as a person, as an individual. Here are my passions, my curiosities. Here's the character. All of these things come together as an applicant to say, you're a great fit at Amherst, right? We can absolutely see you just from reading these things on paper, right? Or screens. Like, we can't wait to see what you're going to do once you get onto campus physically.
All right, so wrapping up with some kind of more practical guidance, Nate, what's one piece of advice you'd give veterans who are afraid to write about the harder parts of their story, but know that those parts help to shape who they are?
I think it has a lot to do with courage, at least for what I'm really reflecting on a day to day. Courage to really accept what has transpired, what has gone on. Courage to reach out to others that can be there to help support you. And then the courage to not let those hard days win, to not let those low points really define you.
Absolutely. Beautiful words. Nick, what is one thing that you want every veteran applicant to understand about writing their admissions essays?
I think, so I'm going to give a two-part. One is something I say in a lot of veteran conversations. Sorry, yes for one. One, bigger picture, don't self-select yourself out of this process. Give yourself the agency to say that you belong in an applicant pool at a place like Amherst College, right? You absolutely should be applying to places like this if education is on your horizon. In terms of the essay specifically, I think really show up with your most authentic self. That's what made Nate's essay so compelling and successful. The fact that he was genuine, articulate, clear in what he wanted to communicate. He didn't shy away from things that maybe were, the hard things to talk about, and he reflected on them, right? And I think if that is the one takeaway you have, right, to be authentic, to be genuine, to be reflective, you can talk about anything you want and make it work to what you hope to accomplish.
Thank you. Nick, thank you for such a thoughtful, generous, and encouraging conversation. For our veteran listeners, your difficult experience do not diminish your application. When handled with reflection, maturity, and purpose, they can strengthen it and reveal the depth of who you are. Your story matters, not because of what happened to you, but because of what you've done with it. This has been Service to School Stories. I'm Whitney Cason. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School's CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.